Mr. O'Rourke.
Just a few additional points. It's worth remembering that the LCS program was pursued deliberately as one that would be done differently from the normal shipbuilding process. And so if there are problems in that program, they are not necessarily representative of problems in the larger process. In particular, the LCS program, I think has just been alluded to, was pursued with a strong focus on reducing acquisition cycle time. And so they were very interested in doing things very quickly, and that got them into a situation of concurrency between design and construction, which is one of the oldest no-nos in defense acquisition, and it led to a situation of haste makes waste. So there were problems in that program, but whether that says something necessarily about the default process for shipbuilding is less clear, because the LCS started off trying to do something different in the first place. In terms of that general process, there's a couple points I can mention, and one has to do with requirements control, requirements discipline. And there was a period in the 90s when the requirements police, as it were, in the Navy, which was a body called the Ship Characteristics Board, or the Ship Characteristics Improvement Board, or the SCIB, was weakened or disestablished. And during that period of time, they were not there to police the requirements process for Navy ship designs. And there's at least one ship that was designed during that period which some people have said suffered requirements growth because of the weakening or the disestablishment of the SCIB during that period. The Navy since that time has taken steps to reestablish that requirements police force under a different name, and to apply it not only to shipbuilding but to aircraft and other acquisition as well. You raised the question of whether there should be stronger centralized control, and I think that's a fair question because other observers have raised this issue as well. And when they do, they point to other examples of where the Navy has successfully pursued very complex and technical acquisition efforts because there was centralized control. And the examples that are usually raised are the setup that we have for naval nuclear propulsion, the Naval Reactors Office, the Special Systems Project Office, or SSP, that brought ballistic missiles into the Navy, and a third example that's sometimes raised is the rather centralized control for the Aegis development program during the 70s and 80s and into more recent years. Those setups are all somewhat different from one another, but they all featured strong control with ultimately direct accountability by one person at the top. But there's one other issue that I think is important in shipbuilding, which is that shipbuilding is a long-term process. It takes many years for a program to pan out, and so there's a long time between when somebody might make a promise about a shipbuilding program and when the results start coming in. And that raises the question of whether there should be some steps taken to make it more possible for somebody who makes a promise at the front end of the process to still be around at the back end of the process to be held accountable for it. And one option to do that would be to set up a director of shipbuilding with a very long tenure, somewhat similar to what you have, for example, with the director of naval reactors. Now, there's pluses and minuses to the option of establishing offices with long tenures, and you'd have to carefully think about that. But that is one option for getting at the issue of possibly making sure that if a promise is made about a shipbuilding program in year A, that same person will still be there to be held accountable for that process years down the road when the return data starts to come in.
Thank you very much. Do you want to do a fourth response, Mr. Chairman? Or?
If I could just follow quickly with a historical note. I worked with Art Zabrowski at the Naval War College during the time period where he dreamed up the LCS, and then I worked as an assistant with him in the Office of Force Transformation during the first 2 years of operation. I will tell you, just as a historical note, which is important, I think, that what they were trying to do with LCS was to kind of break this mentality within the Navy that its ships were in effect sort of a glass jaw, that if we lost one, it was catastrophic. Okay, so he was trying to introduce a fighter pilot mentality toward accepting more risk within the fleet. That's why they went for a small ship that would be close and operate in the littoral, accept much higher levels of risk. And some of the original designs really focused on things like almost a command module that could eject like a fighter pilot ejects out of a plane. Okay, so the dream was to bring a much higher tolerance of risk, get much closer to the actual land security environment. What happened with that dream was that it was subjected to a system that purposely tries to drain all risk out of ship design. So it junked it up. It put all sorts of bells and whistles. The modularity was lost. All sorts of defensive measures and things that kind of codified the design, made it stagnant and static, were introduced over time. And my perception of that process, it's right out of Alan Drury's novel, The Pentagon, which was about the creation of an LCAC during a crisis situation where the Navy wanted to dream up this new landing craft vehicle to deal with this crisis that was developing. And because the military kept adding all these bells and whistles, the machinery was never delivered, the war never happened, and the whole system kind of ground to a pointless halt. I saw that problem with the LCS. I thought it was a good attempt to move the Navy towards a different risk tolerance, and it failed because the system simply does not allow any sort of risk.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. It's been very helpful.